Hello, Mark Surgeon again, and it is time to create a couple controllers to move the bones and make our life easier on animating. Now, these controls are usually made of splines. So I'm going to the Create panel and Standard Primitives. Instead of Standard Primitives, I will pick Shapes. Now, this is the second tab, and from the shapes, the best idea to use circles. Now, when you basically create a circle in the perspective mode that's laying down flat, so it's actually creating the circle on the floor, and I just make it as close to the head as possible, but I don't really have to worry about this because I will use a line tool for this purpose. Now, but before jumping on a line, just let me quickly do something. So when you have a scene like this and you're pressing F9 to quick render, there is no any geometry that renders in the scene except the head. Now, when you have this spline, it is way too thin, and sometimes it is hard to select it from a side view, for example. So I'm going on front, and it's really it is there. You can recognize it, but it's a little bit harder. Now, what you want to do to make it a little bit more comfortable is you want to turn on rendering mode, but not in the renderer. So we don't want to create a render like this one. We want to create actually an enable and viewport option. So when you have the line, but it's not visible in the rendering. So enabling viewport is turned on. Now, when it is turned on, it will automatically generate a mesh around the spline. And if you are in the side view, now it's much easier to select this guy because it's quite thick and easy to select because of that. But of course, you don't need that much polygons because the only purpose is to simply make it easier to select. The sides are reduced, and the problem is from this point, because it's a circle and you start rotating it, you can't really see what you changed. All right, so to make a another setting, I will do an interpolation change, and when interpolation is reduced to 1, now you have this stop sign shape, and it is easier to recognize the way if it's rotated or not, or if it's aligning with something or not. So it just gives a better view. Now there's another combination. If you want, you can use the 2. Still it has its own segments, but it's quite close to the circle. Or you can use the 0, 1 for another type of shape to mix up controllers. So some of these could be head controllers, the others could be finger controllers. So it's up to you. All right, but this time we will just work with the head. Steps, I will leave it to 1, and now here comes the trick. We have a line, but there are many ways to align something. The top 2, the aligns we will use. Now the basic quick align is the hotkey for that is Shift A. Shift A. I like Shift Alien. So when I'm hitting on that, I have the model selected, and as you see, my cursor change, and I will go over the shoulder because this circle will be aligned to the shoulder. So I'm hitting on that, and nothing else happens, just the pivot point of the circle will be snapped to the pivot point of the shoulder bone. All right, so there is no orientation, there's no any other change. These are just snaps. So as you see, this bone is very slightly, but it is not absolutely vertical. It is bent a little bit, but the circle is just matching to the position and not the angle and not the orientation. This is the reason why we are using the quick align at the first level, because we want to make sure that the model is there, the pivot points are centered, but we don't want to adjust orientation like this. We don't want to match the orientation because it's much harder to work with. For example, in this case, you don't want, there's no reason to bend and rotate or tilt this circle. Now, make our renaming. So that will be C head, and that will be control, and that will be 001 and shoulder. Right, so this is the naming convention, starting with the figure's name, Ctrl C, and because it's way too small, I will just add a radius. Okay, is it there? Yeah, that's fine. Maybe a little more. And to make it a little bit faster, I can hold down Shift, drag, and rename the guy here. That will be 002 neck. Change the color to make sure that I'm not confusing these two. Or if I want to be absolutely accurate, I want to use some kind of a closer. So this will be a little bit of a dark orange, and I will use Shift A this time. So Shift A, quick align, and the size could be smaller. Okay, right, using again, and that will be 003 and head. Fine. Shift A to align it to the head. We need more size. Radius is increased, and of course I want to match the color just to follow the structure. So this is a little bit brighter. As you see, it's easier to handle these. And we already here we need a Joe as well, so I will make a small move, and that will be 004 controller, because it's a controller and not a bone. Bone is actually a number 5 for the Joe, but number 4 for the controller. I'm using Shift A, and now because the bone is oriented this way, I'm going to the side view and tilting this angle. So I'm holding down Shift, nothing, just start rotating it. And it's not 100% accurate, but it is okay. In this case, it's absolutely fine to just eyeballing the angle. And I will slightly change the color because I don't want to mess up things. So in this case, that will be a kind of a greenish color, and the radius is, I just want to keep it outside the mesh. Okay, too easy to grab, but somewhat smaller than a head controller. Alright, now that's it. Okay, so this is what we have. We have the controllers. These are named accurately, but the next thing is we have to connect the controllers as a supporting system, so as they are. But right now, what we have the bones, and actually when I'm selecting the root bone, all of the guys are working and moving along. Now, I want the same thing, the same effect with the controllers, but right now these controllers just independent rings. So to do that, I will link them in hierarchy. And hierarchy, don't forget, we always selecting the child, and the child is linked to the parent. Okay, one parent can handle multiple childs. But in this case, we have a straight up hierarchy. So we have a Joe, and when you rotate the head, of course you want to rotate the Joe with the head, and then the head will be linked to the neck and to the shoulders. Now, selecting link is turned on. Joe controller is selected, and Joe controller is linked to head controller. Highlight happened. Now I'm selecting the head controller, holding the left mouse button down, and moving over to the neck controller, releasing it. This is what we have. Okay, I'm selecting the neck controller and linking it to the shoulder. Okay, if you are not sure what to do, make sure you're testing these guys out. Now, but before testing, if you don't want to mess anything up, use Ctrl H hotkey to create a quick hold, and now you can select the model, go to the rotation mode, Actually, it's better if you're going to a local rotation mode and start rotating these things around. Okay, head is rotating the gel, perfect. Neck is rotating the head and rotating the gel controller as well. Okay, when I'm selecting the shoulder, alright, everybody is working together. Now, we still have some kind of an independent connection. So what we can do, when we are selecting this controller, now it drags all the other controllers as well, and of course the bone is dragging the bones. We have no connection yet. Now what to do? Don't forget, linking constraint is working only on root bones. You cannot link the head bone to the head controller because you will break up the connection. If you want to maintain something, a normal connection between the bones, for future modifications or any other purposes, then you want to use a different kind of constraining method. So in this case, what you can do exactly, you can select the shoulder, and the shoulder is you are able to link the shoulder bone because it's a root bone to the shoulder controller. Now this link just happened, and I'm moving these around. Alright, now take a look at the schematic view. So actually opening up Graph Editor's schematic view, I have it already. Okay, it's just not appearing. Why not? Just let me have this one. Okay. Oh, it's just, wow, it's weird. Okay, let me fix this. Okay, so Graph Editors, and I was just messing with the track views, I guess, but it was stuck in somewhere. Right. Now, save schematic views. Because I was opening up a schematic view, just let me quickly opening up it again. And this is the schematic view that we have. And here's the linking. Here's the connection between the guys. So we have a head controller. The head controller is selected. This is indicated in red. We have a neck controller. And as you see, the leader of all is, if you double click on now on this one, all of the guys will be selected. But we have no connection between the two on the level. Okay, and we want to do that connection. We want to create that connection. Right now you have a house and you have a support for the house, but there are no bolts, so these beams are not bolted to the house. These are not mounted, so you have to generate and create the connection. Now the connection works this way. Start with the jawbone, and jawbone will be constrained. We will use constraint to the jaw controller. So animation constraints, and what we do need is orientation constraint. Position is already coming from the linked support. So what we do need is orientation, and that would be the angle. Now, but before we are doing this, one thing that we have to take care of is pivot points. I will just quickly create this orientation constraint, and just to check what happens. Alright, if you see the flipping that caused by an orientation issue, and we will handle that, but just let me first just try to make this connection. So animation constraints and orientation constraint, and I'm clicking on a Joe, and okay, something is not right. This is what happened. The bone is actually flipped, and it's so painful. I have to just delete it. Now, how to delete it? I'm in the move panel, rotation. I have the rotation list. Here's the constraint I've created, and I will hit on delete. And now I got back my original position, but I just lost, and I couldn't make this orientation constraint. Now the problem is lying somewhere at the pivot points. Now just take a look at the pivot points. So I'm going in a hierarchy panel and selecting this Joe controller, and affecting pivots turned on, and as you see, Because I've rotated the model, the pivot point is also rotated slightly. Just let me turn off geometry by pressing Shift G. So as you see, we have an orientation of this z-axis. The blue one is pointing to this direction. But now I will select the bone, and as you see, the bone's z-axis is oriented this way. Now when you are creating this constraint between the bone and the controller, this constraint will match the z-axis, the x, and the y-axis in both items. So this way, this is the reason why the bone is actually flipping. To avoid that flipping effect, I will select the controller. I can manipulate the pivot point of the controller in just the controller, and I will use a standard align, and I will align the pivot point. So here is the controller. The controller is selected. The control pivot point is affected. I'm clicking on the bone, and now it will align the position, which one is already there because I used a quick align. Don't forget, we used quick align. So the position of these two are okay, are just fine, but the orientation, as you see, it's not turned on yet. So when I'm hitting on X, it will instantly flip. Okay, and actually that single first click is enough to reorient the pivot point. Now the pivot point of the controller will match to the bone's pivot point, and I will just scale. I'm not interested in scale. I will press OK, and actually turning off affect pivot only, and just let me quickly check it in work. So I will select the jaw bone, go back to animation, go in constraints and orientation constraint, and I will hit on jaw controller, and there is no flip. And what do I want to do? I want to use my controller. So when I'm selecting the controller, again testing, so I'm pressing Ctrl H, and I started rotating. All right, this is the result I'm looking for. So when I'm moving the controller, the bone is moving with the controller as well. When I'm moving the entire model, everybody is moving as one unit. Okay, so this was the first bone completed. I will undo, checking it from the front view, everything is fine. Go back perspective, and I have to do this pivot point trick with the same with all these controllers and bones. Now to make it a little bit faster, hierarchy, affect pivot only, and Alt A is the hotkey. So always controller is selected, pressing Alt A, head controller pivot point aligned to head bone pivot point, and pressing OK. Neck controller pivot point aligned to neck bone, and pressing OK. And selecting the shoulder controller, Alt A, aligning to the shoulder bone pivot point, and pressing OK. And here we go. Now I'm leaving effect pivots. So here comes the constraint part. Head is selected, modifiers, animation constraints, orientation constraint, and constrained to the head controller. Okay, neck bone selected, animation constraints and orientation constraint to the neck controller, and shoulder to the shoulder controller. Okay, so what happens? Hold. What we can do, simply rotate around. So when the head controller is rotated, every bone is rotated respectively. When I'm rotating around the jaw, it's also rotating. Of course, it keeps its relative position. Okay, just let me quickly do this. Neck, is it working? Wow, super nice. And of course, the shoulder will take everything, so we have it absolutely fine. Now, let me just quickly test what happens if I start to move these guys. Okay, so I've linked all of these to the shoulder, but the child could be moved easily. So when you have a link system, when you have a controller system like this one, um, you can always move away the childs. But because we are using orientation constraints, the orientation, if you change the orientation of this model, it is still updating on the other side. Okay, I know it's weird, but it is possible because these guys are just following the orientation, the angle, the rotation of the model. It actually, they don't care about the position in space. Now, because it is good if you want to create a remote controller. So if you want to create a controller here, set up a camera, and you want to work here in animation, and you want to follow how the guy is changing in position, that's just fine. But if you don't want to do that, then you can just lock the movements. Now to do that, we have hierarchy again, but instead of using the pivot area, we will use link info. And I will actually select all the controllers, and within that I would just lock movements, and I will also lock scales. So when you have this lock established, you cannot move it anymore. Okay, if you want to unlock it, you can do that. Now you can move it as you wish, but these parts, for example, because these are logged, you cannot move them further. Okay, so this is the trick of locking an item, and as well, this one is also logged. Uh, if I'm interested, I can also lock rotation as well, but here we go. So this is the basic rigging structure of the figure, and we will create and we will jump in the skinning part. But to do that, we will use something else called freezing transformation. Okay, because skidding is easier if you have some kind of a short animation, and it could be a little bit messy if you just accidentally move away things, and for animation it's a good idea to have kind of a frozen transformation point. Now to do that, I will select the controllers using hold, and if you press Alt right click, you have this pop-up, and within the pop-up there is freeze transform, and when you hit freeze transform, then you will be able to use transform to 0. uh, Let me show how this is working. So I'm freezing transform for all these objects, and I want to keep it as it is, so okay, yes. Now when I start moving around, or rotating around in this case because I locked all the moves, I'm rotating the head, and when I'm not satisfied, I can alt right click and transform to 0. Sometimes the screen needs to update, but what's the benefit of this? Just imagine I've rotated the jaw, I've opened up the jaw, for example, rotated the head, rotated the neck, and I want to reset my jaw, but I'm in animation, I don't want to reset everything, I just want to reset the jaw to make it neutral. So I'm selecting the jaw controller, alt right click and transform it to 0, and it will transform to 0 in respect of where the head is. Okay, I just want to reset the neck area, so alt right click and transform to 0, and that's just for the neck. And I still have to transform the head to get back to the absolute original position, but here we go, this is what we have. Alright, so the rig is ready, and the next part is the skinning. Thank you very much, see you next time.